Hi, thank you guys for joining me today on my South Coast Veterinary Management Solutions YouTube channel. I'm super excited today to welcome Susie and Jamie, and we're going to be talking about toxic cultures in a veterinary hospital and the times that we personally, as managers, had to help change that culture and all the things that we've had to do and all the experiences that we have. So super happy to have them join me today. So I'm going to go ahead and have Susie introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who she is and all lovely things veterinary that she does.
Hi, my name is Susie Waters. I'm a hospital administrator at Lawndale Pet Hospital, which is in LA. I have been a veterinary technician for about 30 years and been in the administrative side for probably the last 18 to 20. I have a degree, my animal science degree, obviously for my technician, and a cultural anthropology degree as well. And I've been at my current hospital for about 3 years.
Excellent. Jamie, why don't you tell us about you?
You bet. Well, my name is Jamie Davis. I am a CVPM. I have been managing veterinary practices for over 20 years. My current role is a veterinary practice coach for veterinary growth partners. So now I get to help lead and support managers, which is awesome. So I've been doing that since May. But prior to that, it was pretty much all practices through my entire career. So primarily small animal GP, but various different sizes and even various different states. So a lot of different teams over my career.
Excellent. So I know when I first got promoted to being a manager, I didn't really understand the culture dynamic. I mean, I think I knew things I didn't love and wanted differently, but I didn't have any idea of what toxicity looked like or how to change it or anything like that. It took a long time for me to figure that out. What were your experiences, Susie, as far as toxicity in your workplaces or not having toxicity, or like what you've done to help make differences?
Well, I think like a lot of managers out there, I was a technician and I kind of fell into the role as manager. I got injured on the job. So I was on light duty and the practice manager ended up going on maternity leave. So I just kind of stepped up and filled in some of her duties. And then she ended up being a stay-at-home mom, and ta-da, now I'm also a practice manager. So there's not also been a lot at the time, which was like I said, about 20 years ago. There wasn't talk of culture or the educations and the CEs that there are now that have to do with, it was just kind of come in and do the best you can. And at the time, I feel like my entire process for interacting with my team was, how would I want to be treated? And then, obviously now it's so much, I don't want to say easier, but there's so many more resources for us. But yes, I definitely had some very toxic environments. Not luckily, I feel at the initial place that I became a practice manager, there I was very supported by the practice owner, which I think is one of the most important parts, is that support from your practice owner. And so from there, it was just a learning process, I guess you could say.
Because you said practice owner, and for anyone who's watching that isn't in our field, that means usually the head veterinarian, medical director, or owner of the hospital. And I think that is something to say when you have a supportive person at the very top and you have someone who wants to really have a good culture. That makes the biggest difference. Have you worked somewhere that you didn't have that same kind of support?
Absolutely. I did. I had and it was on an upper level. I was working in corporate medicine at the time, so their title would have been field director, I think. And so I struggled with my own ability to do my job, my own ability to support my staff, because I didn't have that support from the upper management, and it was very toxic. And so I feel like the majority of my job at that point became trying to protect my team from that toxicity. And that's very time consuming, very exhausting, and not the best use of my time and resources, but it was very, very difficult. I ended up leaving that job when I just felt that I wasn't, you get to a point where you just feel like you're running in circles when you're hitting a brick wall when there is not going to be any advancement in that support. And sometimes decisions have to be made, for your own health.
Yeah, for your own sanity.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes you're, like you said, running in circles.
Yeah.
Jamie, what has been your experiences with working in different toxic environments, either as a manager or as a regular employee?
Yeah, well, I kind of jumped into management with both feet right out of college. So I had looked back now and realized there were so many things that I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And much like Susie alluded to, is there's an awareness piece that essentially you don't really have in the beginning of being aware of like, what is toxic? There's the whole, like, this is what I signed up for. And, this is what it's like to work in our field. And those, kind of those lies we tell ourselves to make us deal with some of the not so great people or places that we've worked. So I think that was my biggest thing, is just becoming aware of what a toxic workplace culture is. So that was kind of where it all started for me, is trying to figure out what that was so that I could have a little bit of, kind of a frame of reference. And even just defining like what I wanted, what was important to me, what were, my core values, what I looked for in a team. And when you're the leader of a team, it's a very different perspective, because you are then trying to create this thing that you love and care about, and trying to find other people that also love and care about it in the same way. So it's not necessarily an easy spot to be in a management role.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes felt like I was that in between. It was what, was the reason why I kind of shied away from being in practices that had like husband-wife teams or siblings that were leading the practice, trying to be cut out some of that drama, because I thought that was what contributed to a lot of it. And you're really trying to
is different.
Yeah,
when it's a spouse or a family member. 100%.
Very much so.
It works well in some practices, but like you said, I don't know that it always works. So
right. And I think for me, it was just not necessarily understanding the differences too, because that's, if that relationship isn't healthy, it can really cause some negative, just energy within the practice. So I think once I started to realize, okay, what is this positive culture? What's really important to me? Once I really started to figure out I think I then realized how many kind of broken cultures I had worked in previously, to kind of having that realization. But for me, it's really about finding that right place for you, finding something that aligns with your core values, and really being able to build on that.
Yeah. I think the step of recognizing if the culture might be broken is kind of a key thing. At my first hospital, it was a wonderful practice, and I worked there for a long time, so I loved the hospital. But when I first took over as a manager, there was a lot of aspects of toxicity that I just didn't understand. I didn't understand why my technician was angry because I wouldn't buy something, like a giant expensive piece of equipment. I didn't understand why there was so much negative gossipy stuff, and I didn't understand why people weren't being nice to each other. I just didn't get it, and I didn't know what to do at that time. I don't know, Susie, if you've had similar types of experiences, and if you have, what did you do to help fix that? I know with your one practice, it was your leader, so that made it really complicated, but right. What have you been able to do to fix that when you've experienced it?
Well, in my most recent practice, I was hired on because the owner himself recognized that it was a toxic environment. So the recognition of the toxicity level of the practice before I even came on board, that it was huge. And so I was hired with the sole purpose of fixing that toxicity. So I will say, like, within the first year, I had a 78% turnover.
Wow.
And that was not because they left voluntarily. And so it's recognizing that toxicity and then being able to there's conversations that need to be made. Maybe it's just something as simple as they don't recognize that in themselves, or they don't have a clear understanding of something that's going on. Like when you mentioned the person not understanding why we can buy expensive equipment, sometimes I've found that if you sit that person down and then show them the numbers and where the money goes, within whatever the owner is comfortable with. I've always worked with people that are very like open book about the finances. And I have because I have had experiences with that. How come we can't buy this new thing? How come we can't do this when we're making all this money? Or we made this much on last week or something. I'll sit down and go, okay, well, do you even realize how much it costs just to get through the day? This is how much this costs. This is how much this costs. This is how much this costs. Okay, so where would you like the money to come from? You show me, and I will be more than happy to visit that with you.
I wish I had that brain power at that moment. At that moment, I didn't know to do that. I didn't know. Well, that would have been fantastic.
Right. And I feel like early on in my career, that wasn't really a culture to share, to have open books, to share financial information, to have those open conversations, because I remember being a technician, also having some of those questions, like, where does the money go? How much do these things cost? And there are people within your hospital that find that stuff very interesting. And I feel like I've met some other practice managers and practice owners who keep that information very, close to the chest, because they feel that somehow it puts them at risk. But I feel like a lot of times it really helps the team to invest in the hospital when they can actually see how it works in the business aspect. And maybe they don't want to be a manager, maybe that's not what their goal is, but they find it very interesting. And it's nice to see, especially as a technician, when you worked a big 10-hour shift, what that dynamic did to the hospital as a whole and what it means, and having set goals that they can see financially. But I feel like early on in the career, that was not the culture at all. We just didn't talk about that stuff, and that wasn't any of our business. So
I think it's helpful when they understand that if they're wanting to not charge for things or give away services.
Exactly.
We all love animals so much, and that's why we're in this field, but we really can't give away all these services because then we won't have a business. So I do think that aspect, that component of transparency helps them understand that. And there's ways I've seen one of the AHA reps several years ago, she actually did like a manager meeting that she showed like how you can do a game out of it. You can use percentages, and you can do like Monopoly and have them all have cash money and fake money to say, you have this much money and this is how much your bill is, how much do you have at the end of the month? Like, and it was actually really cool. It was a really good experience. So if any hospital manager has their P&L on actual numbers, but change it and make it different numbers and use Monopoly money to have their team help pay the bills, that's a really good way to help them.
I would love to see that. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, super fun. Jamie, I know you're having some technical things. So what are your thoughts on your own changing the dynamic of the hospital, like things you've done?
Well, I think the big thing for me was definitely trying to find like defining the culture and really living the culture. So, for example, communication, having open communication, being transparent. I started to ask myself, it's like, okay, every time I talk to somebody, I shut the door. Every time, there's an issue, it's all very secretive. And I didn't want a secretive culture. I wanted people to have, open adult conversations. So I started to like look in the mirror, see like, okay, how am I behaving? And then what am I expecting my team to behave like? And do those things match? Because the answer to that question in my practice in certain situations is that they didn't. So I was asking my team to behave one way, and I was visually showing them a different way. So I realized that when I started to make those changes, that things started to improve greatly. Vulnerability was also a huge thing too. Like, to be able to tell team, especially when COVID started, to be like, listen, I have 3 young kids at home doing school at home in various different ways, and it's breaking me. And if I am, just disengaged at work during the day, know that it's not about you guys. Like, I want you to know I have these things going on at home, and being able to, just kind of like Susie was talking about, some of those kind of taboo things that were like, oh, you leave all your personal stuff at the door. We don't talk about finances, like all these things, these walls that we've put up. We have to break those things down. I mean, to not have feelings and emotions and those types of things be part of your workday, not reality.
I like,
And, it's about learning how to have conversations and effective solutions and support systems set up when those things come into play in our workplace, not about acting like they don't exist. And that was, I think, really important to me, is like, we want to function as a team, and as around the stuff that real life throws our way. And the reality was that at the time when I joined the practice, it wasn't happening that way. It was pretty much like, this is ideally what I want it to look like, from, upwards down, like saying, okay, I know and similar to Susie, like, I know the culture is broken, I know that we have issues. These are changes I want to see happen. But it's about walking the walk. And when we stop doing that, or when we don't even realize that we're not doing that, I think that's where you're going to have the biggest problems, because the leaders have to be hyper aware of how we're functioning, how we're working day to day, how we're interacting. And are those matching up? Are those falling in line with the culture and the core values that we have actively talked about and live and breathe every day in the practice, and not just put in a pretty frame and hang it on the wall and act like that's going to fix our problems.
Yeah. I like how you mentioned the core values, because I will be honest, when I first started going to management talks a long time ago now and learning about your mission statement and your core values, and I was honestly a non-believer. I thought it was all BS, and I'm like, this is stupid. Why are you going to hang it on your wall? Like, it's so dumb. And fast forward, a long time between, I've learned how important that actually is. And I recognize that I was very fortunate that over the years of my first practice, I could change the culture somewhat. And I think a lot of it was the people that stayed. I didn't have as much of a turnover as Susie did after I got promoted, but I did have some turnover. And the people that stayed, and then the people that I hired, sort of emulated the type of personality and the type of culture that I wanted, but I didn't make the effort to do the mission statement and the value statement to help them understand like why they were doing what they were doing, like they were really good people. And I had a fantastic team when I left, and I cried because they were such a wonderful team, but I didn't make that effort to actually do the vision and mission statement with them. And had I done that, I can only imagine how much more I could have accomplished if I actually made that effort at the time, because it took me 5 or 6 years to really get a good team from a somewhat toxic-ish team. And I didn't do it right because I didn't know how to do it. I know, Susie, you seem to have gotten that faster at your current hospital. Like, you definitely did it faster than I did. So tell us about the things that you've done to really help build up your culture and change the environment.
So I think one of them, and I keep going back to this because I've been thinking about this a lot, knowing this conversation is going to happen. One of the biggest attributes, I think, to my ability to transform this hospital was the support that I had from the practice owner, because I was given the ability to come in and do my job and take risks. If you're going to change the culture, sometimes tough decisions have to be made. And sometimes those decisions are to let people go. And, it's veterinary medicine. We're all shorthanded. We're all constantly trying to hire new people. We've all done that desperate hire, right? And we end up paying the price that ends up costing you so much more than just being shorthanded. So you have to be willing to understand that you're going to be shorthanded, or things might be slow, or you're going to have to hire someone that's a little green and put in the extra work. As a technician and administrator, I knew that my part was that I was going to have to be a technician for a while. I was going to have to do double the workload, or try and find times to be an administrator in between all those things. And to have 100% support from my practice owner was huge, because if I was also battling that dynamic, it would have been a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
Moving forward from that, as I hired people, very much like you said about the mission statement and the core values, I think if you hire people who I hired for personality and culture more than I do for skill, right? You can't teach the soft skills, you can teach the hard skills. And so if you hire people that share the same core values as you, and believe in your mission statement, when you do have an issue, say that you do need to have that courageous conversation with them, it's very easy to say, okay, here was your behavior. Here is what we agreed our core values are. How does your behavior emulate respecting these core values? Put it back on them, and then they can go, wow, it really didn't. And when I signed on, that's what I believe in at the core of who I am. That's what I believe in. That's what I want. And then so it makes it easier to have that conversation about what can we do moving forward. Usually what it also opens up when you come at it like that, they don't feel attacked for the most part. And it, and I feel like it leads them, to, usually I find out it's something that has nothing to do with work. Very much like how we talked about, like how Jamie said, we have that whole work-life balance where we don't talk about this, we don't talk about that. And not that you want to pull these things out of people, but sometimes I think that's one of the walls we need to break down. Like, it's okay to come into work and go, wow, I just had this really horrible thing happen in my personal life and I'm really struggling, and then being able to offer them the option. What do you need? How can I help you with that? Do you need to go home? Do you need to take a personal day? Do you need to just sit in my office and cry? Because that's happened too. Like Jamie had said, I took a look at my behavior. Did I work with the door closed? How did my team react when I said, hey, can you come in my office real quick? I just want to talk to you. If everybody gets those doe eyes, like deer in the headlights, like, oh no. And I was like, well, that's not the reaction I want, because I really wanted to talk to them about their school schedule and how I wanted to offer them more flexibility. But if they're like, if they're really like immediately that stomach drop feeling, I remember having that. And I, like Jamie had said, I looked in the mirror and went, what can I do differently so that is not the immediate, other than going, hi, can I talk to you? You're not in trouble. You know what I mean? Like,
I had to phrase that. There's nothing, don't worry, there's nothing to that. Like,
yeah, so I try and like my door open, and you see my office is like, my office is right there in the center of everything. And so I try and leave it open, and even my staff tries to instinctively close it, like, oh, she's the manager, she wants to close. I'm like, no, leave it open. Like, you guys should be able to walk in here, and as long as I'm not doing anything, coaching or counseling or anything like that, you guys should walk in and see me doing financials and hear me talking to, whatever. So I think that, sorry, I got a little off track. If you set that precedence in the beginning, and that's the thing you have to understand, is that takes time and that takes work and trust and effort. But once you do, then everything else just kind of falls in line, and it makes it so much easier, because if you remember that the team as a whole has the same goal, then all the other things are just kind of, easy to handle.
I think what you mentioned about, the team and different things you've done, but I feel like I learned from Sean McVay many years ago now.
Love him.
I know, he's awesome. He's kind of indirectly Jamie's boss, right?
Well, yeah, kind of. He's one of the main peeps.
Yeah, he's like,
I've sat across from a table and chatted with him now, so it's always kind of like a little mind blowing that I'm like now on the same team as Sean McVay. Like, I'm like,
oh my gosh!
But he's a great guy. Great guy.
Yeah, years ago he said it takes 3 years. Typically, on average, it'll take 3 years to change the culture of the hospital, good to a good way. It takes a lot less than that to change it negatively.
Absolutely.
You just start letting things run amok and shit, rolls downhill. I don't know if you're allowed to cuss on YouTube, but whatever. But he said that 3 years, and I did it in about 6. So obviously I didn't do it right, but I think that the expectation of time, and you mentioned that, Susie, it takes time to change those things. Mm-hmm. I think that you have to recognize in yourself, like, both of you guys have said, like, what you can do to make the difference in yourself, to make sure you're leading forward. I do think vulnerability is a huge thing. I know I'm a Brene Brown fan. I know Jamie is. I don't know if you are, Susie, but she talks a lot about vulnerability. And I feel like leaders at being vulnerable with their team is such a huge thing. I had an employee several years ago. She had gone through a huge, she was engaged and then she was going through a breakup with her engagement. And she was just really upset and down, and she was getting all this pressure from her family. And so I have been divorced twice personally. And my first one when I was younger, I was a lot younger when I got married the first time. And I was at her age that she was currently when she was going through her separation or breakup. And I just talked to her about my experience. And it wasn't something I talked about a lot with regular people. Just had been several years previous at that time. And she related so much to that. And she appreciated my advice to her. She's now married, has like 2 kids, super happy. She married a different person, obviously. And she sent me a text message that said, "Thank you so much for that conversation." And it was me being vulnerable and letting kind of her into my own personal struggle that I went through when I got divorced after getting married at 19, that I wanted her to kind of understand like how she could be better and move forward with it. But it was honestly, it was a huge moment for me as a manager to really make a difference and make an impact and be super vulnerable, because I don't know that I was really vulnerable enough before that. So I do think, even though I don't recommend everybody share all their personal stuff with their team, I think there's times when you can, and when it's appropriate, and when it make the team look at you differently in a good light. And the fact that you get what they're going through, the fact that you've been there, and the fact that you can share, be comfortable enough to share. But if you overshare all the time, then that doesn't really work. So you gotta definitely keep your eyes on that. But I think that that's one thing as a leader that leaders can do to help themselves, and just learning how to balance that out.
I feel like those opportunities tend to present themselves. I've never, when I have shared or have become vulnerable with my team, I never woke up in the morning and went, "Today I'm going to tell my team about my divorce." I've been divorced as well. Like, today I'm going to tell my team all about my divorce. Like, I feel like those opportunities have just presented themselves to me, be it a teammate coming to me or something. And in that moment, it just felt right to just go, "I'm going to share this with you." Or
Exactly.
But yeah, I agree.
I think it's that human element that we sometimes try and shove down because we're the boss or we're leaders and we can't be human and we can't make mistakes. And I think when you do show your human side to your team at the appropriate times, like you said, when that opportunity presents itself, it makes a huge difference. And, just sharing kind of my personal story, and even just threads of what we're talking about is, my most recent team, there was a big cultural shift that happened. I was at the practice for 7 years, and there was actually a change in leadership that happened, I think, in order to really have the change really gain momentum. But realizing that, it's that top down is super important. And I kind of hung in there and fought until it happened. So that's the stubbornness in me, I guess. But the reality was, that I constantly came back to is that I couldn't do it alone. Like this whole shift in culture conversation, everything that we've said, we talk about how we had other leaders or mentors or friends or confidants and things like that have helped. And I think that's so important, is that these culture shifts, I mean, yes, there's lead that's required to really get the changes to happen. But ultimately, like if you don't have the support system within where you're at to try and make those changes, like you got to find one. You have to, and of course I'm a practice coach, so I try and be that for a lot of people, where, leaders can kind of lean into somebody for help in those changes that they want to have happen, which is actually why I have the role I do now, because I really wanted to be able to continue to do that for other people. But there are so many ways that you can find, just a sounding board, an ear to bend when you need to, and just somebody to ask advice and resources from, and just talk to about things. Because especially if you're in the veterinary industry, if you're talking to somebody who's also in the veterinary industry, they will likely have some similar experiences. Because as much as we like to think we live in our own bubble and we're so unique and this only happens, I mean, oh my gosh, like there's threads. And just what you were talking about earlier, Susie, with, struggles with, team and trying to make decisions about having the right people on the team and getting rid of toxic, entity. I mean, I had that conversation just this morning with one of my clinics about a struggle that they're having, and they know the importance of culture, and it is making those decisions for the greater good.
Yeah.
And knowing that, yes, short staff things are going to happen. Yes, change is going to happen. It's going to be hard, but man, is it so worth it. And so that's the thing I consistently say is when people are going through really digging their heels in and making cultural changes and doing the work in their hospital to make those changes, that especially when they're having low lows, like knowing like it is worth it. Like I know it's hard, but it is so worth it, because man, when I left my last team, that was like, I feel like I left them at the top of the top, and it felt so good to have like made the impact and lifted that team up to, because I knew it was possible. And it was just about, that time that it took to really make it happen and see it happen. And then be able to, hire the person to take my place that I knew was going to be able to carry it forward and on. So it was kind of like that full circle. But seriously, like you have to have a support system. We live in this lonely leadership position sometimes where we think, like it's just me, all of it, it all runs downhill and I'm at the top and the bottom, it's like, you feel like that, like I'm by myself. It's very lonely up here, but this is the position that I want to be in and I love. But you have to, you have to have those support systems around you. And it can't always be the people that are right there in your bubble on your team.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, an important lesson.
I think everybody, that kind of made me think of how my first few years as a manager, I didn't have any manager friends. So I didn't sleep very well at night because I just always was stressing out on myself about the team and this and that. And it took me about maybe 3 years to where I started to make Orange County manager friends. And that was life-changing. And now having a tribe, as we call ourselves, of people who get what you're going through, do what you do, have probably dealt with the crap that you've dealt with, and they can just like be your shoulder to cry on or to be angry with or whatever. And I do think that that's essential for any manager, to have someone that they can confide in and share with, who gets their experiences, not their spouse. That's hard. Well, maybe if their spouse understands, but then that's kind of hard because then you're always putting your negative stuff on them. But I feel like it's having a tribe of other managers or other leaders that you can relate to and get to. I think that's huge. And I think that wherever area you're in, and finding that group, I know the VHMA has their Member Connect where people share information. I know there's several Facebook manager groups that people share information and get to know each other locally. For me, I'm in Southern California, so we have pretty much our whole SoCal network down here now of like all these different managers and practice owners as well. And I think that's essential. So I know I met Susie and she became part of our group, and it's been really awesome to have another member of our little tribe down here in Southern California. And I highly suggest that every manager find one or more than one person. I think having multiple people.
Oh yeah. Different, yeah, sure. Different avenues, different resources. I mean, virtual, in person.
Yep.
I think whatever you need to do, whatever opportunities are out there. I mean, and even like outside of the veterinary industry has great benefits too, small business associations or, chamber of commerce, like,
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, there's lots of different opportunities to really connect with other business owners, other managers, other leaders. So you don't necessarily have to put yourself in, into that box either, where it has to be veterinary related. Yes, there's great advantages to that because of that, like understanding really intimately where you've been. But sometimes some of these big conversations or these big issues that we deal with, they're across, party lines, so to speak. I mean, they go into all industries. You can learn some, and a lot of what I do in helping people with, managing and leading their teams and strategic planning and stuff, we pull a lot of things from other industries, and, like the core values piece, there's a reason why companies like IBM and Coca-Cola and Disney and Apple and all of them have core values and have, purpose statements, and they have all these things because they work. That's why they're there. It's not just this hokey thing, marketing ploy. It's because it works. And, again, we tend to put ourselves sometimes in this little box, like, oh, we're especially unique. It doesn't work for us because we're veterinary. And, when we start to break down those walls and again, reach out beyond our practice. I mean, that was, I think, one of the biggest things for me of like transitioning from being in one practice to now, kind of being in a different role, like an industry role. I realized like how many like amazing, great people there are in our industry that I never got exposed to before. And I was kind of like, shame on me for like not getting, like not putting myself out there and meeting all these wonderful, intelligent people that, I felt like I missed out in the early part of my career just by being so just like closed in my practice. But there's so many great opportunities out there. And sometimes it's just about, exploring the unique ones and, thinking outside of the box when it comes to networking, because that is also on a totally big tangent is how a lot of practices are finding team right now.
Yep.
Is through networking and, those relationships. That's, it's not the whole like place an ad and they will come type thing anymore, as we all know. So that networking piece and having those channels and those relationships, those teams who have those in place are having a much easier time just in the whole grand scheme of things of finding new team members. And then when you have a really strong culture and people know what your culture is because you're not shy about it, that makes a huge difference too, because candidates are looking for that as well.
And we got one of my hospitals in LA County area is in kind of a smaller community of parts of LA County. And we were really shorthanded for a bit because somebody was it was right when COVID hit and we were down 2 people. And this is a small practice, like 4 to 5 people practice. You can't be down 2 people. Like that's the problem. And I reached out to one of the reps in the local managers group, and she sent an email to all her managers and say, hey, can any of your technicians or assistants come work, take a shift at this other hospital? Like we didn't steal anybody. They just came. And so for probably about a month, we had extra hands because of that networking. We got help to get us through when the employees could come back to work because of the different situations that put them off work. And so that was huge. Like to me, I feel like that couldn't have happened without that, trust within the community, the veterinary community, and the networking that, the owner had done and that I had done to really get good people to come in and just help temporarily. So it was awesome. And we were able to survive through that and then get people back and we're okay again. So yeah, that was really.
That's part of our culture too, right? Like how we function within the veterinary space, not just within our own hospital walls, but how we focus in the veterinary community as a whole. And if there's anything that speaks to, I think, team, it's that, they want to make a difference and, they want to do community involvement and, and that plays right into that. And it's so important. I mean, it can be our lifeblood, like you just said, Melissa, in times of challenge, when we have people to reach out to, boy, that can mean the difference between your practice staying open and you're closing your doors. I mean, it really can be something like that. So.
Absolutely, especially with COVID.
Yeah, I know, right?
I think like Jamie had a really good point about, you said a word that really triggered me, and that was being in our position is lonely sometimes. And I remember there was a point in my career where I feel as managers, it's our job to have the big picture. Like at all times, I have to have the vision of the big picture. And a lot of times, my practice owner, veterinarian, he's got his own things he needs to worry about. And the big picture of the practice is not part of that. It's my job. And sometimes it's hard to impart that onto your team as well. So when you are in charge of the big picture, sometimes you have to be the bad guy and be the bad guy with the idea that it's the next necessary step to get us to that next part. And it can feel really lonely when you're in that moment of this is going to hurt for a little bit. It's going to be a growing pain. But this is the thing we need to do. We've got to rip off this Band-Aid or whatever it is at that moment. But it can feel super lonely. And the networking that I've found in, in Orange County practice managers, and then in Southern California, and then even like you had said, the Chamber of Commerce. I started going to Chamber of Commerce meetings and meeting other business people, like, because just like you had said, both had said, I had felt like we're veterinary medicine, people don't understand. One of the things I learned, Sean McVay, let's go back to him for a second. I met him at IVEX and I followed him around that seminar, like a groupie. I was so enamored by what he had to say. And one of his lectures was about the type of people that work in veterinary medicine. And he sat down and started describing a person. He's like, this is your overnight tech. And he's like, this attribute, this characteristic. And I was like, oh, it is, and then this is your morning receptionist. And this is your person who's been, and it was just, he breaks it all down. And I was like, I felt like there was a spotlight on me and it was like, Susie, this is your team. And I was like, oh my goodness, but to look around at everyone else, and there were hundreds of people in this room and everybody nodding their head and having the same look going, oh, it's not just me. It's everyone has the same kind of thing going on, the same personalities. That alone in a room of, hundreds of people made me feel less lonely as a manager. But then when you break it down and you go to these things and you hear that the guy that is running the Starbucks and the guy that is, running the Chick-fil-A, we are all in the same boat and we all have to make the same decisions, and we all have that sense of loneliness. And I don't want to be the bad guy, but it's hard to tell your staff, these are the decisions I'm making. And I think that's super important, right? To have it sit down and go, I recognize that this is gonna suck, but when we get to the other side of this is my goal. What really sucks is when you get there and that's not what happens. And then you have to stand up and go, I'm sorry. This was my vision. This is where I thought we were going. And I didn't get us there. And so, that honesty with your team, of the humanity of it as well, I think is super important. And that's where the investment comes, right? With hiring the right people that are invested and go, okay, well, let's try again.
Well, I was thinking about what you were saying, and it kind of made me realize, I know that we're going to be wrapping up our discussion in a little bit. And I was thinking about, if you had one tip to give another manager of who may be dealing with a toxic work environment or a lot of negativity in their environment, if they don't think it's completely toxic, but like, what would be your one tip that you would give them that they could do right away to start the change? And for myself, one of the things that I started to do, which did start to make the change, was holding people accountable to what they were doing, because everybody would come into my office and tell me they're mad about something because somebody did something. I was never allowed to tell the person, don't say I said anything, but that was a famous sentence I would get. But it was allowed me to recognize that I needed to start holding people more accountable to, if they were tardy all the time, if they called out all the time, if they constantly made mistakes because they weren't paying attention or whatever. And I found that accountability factor really started to put some pressure on the people who were not performing the best, and they kind of had some choices to make. And it allowed my other team members to kind of see the end result of that. Even though they didn't know what the conversations were, they weren't aware of that, they kind of saw changes. Either the person left and we replaced them with someone who was a better performer, or the person got their shit together and started performing better. So I don't know, that would be my one tip if I were to give one, to say holding people accountable is the best way to start that culture change into a good way. What would you guys say? Susie.
Oh, okay. I was like trying to think. I was going to follow up with what you said. Absolutely holding other people accountable. And I think if you have like the good, like we talked about the core values, if you have good job descriptions, and that they have signed job descriptions and they have signed the employee handbook, it makes those courageous conversations so much easier to go, hey, you know what your job is, right? Can you tell me what your job is? Or can you tell me what is you are, expected of you. Cool. So you know you're supposed to show up on time. You signed this paper that said you want to talk about why you're not showing up on time. Put it back on them, and then you learn a lot, right? Sometimes you find out why. Maybe they're having a struggle you didn't know about. I would say too, for the most part, if you're in a place and you know the person that's toxic, sometimes it's more than one person, but a lot of times there is a core person, and it's usually someone that unfortunately has the highest skill level or has been there for 40 years, or you can go through all the things that is it. Take the leap and get rid of them. Take the leap and get rid of them. I guarantee the improvement you're going to see in your team and in your culture and the energy of the hospital is going to be worth every bit of the struggle of finding someone new, the shifts you're going to have to fill, the grumbling of the team for having to work a little bit harder because that person maybe did carry a really big workload, but the drama and the toxicity and the ugliness of the work environment that they're creating, everything else is going to seem easy once that's gone. Easier, I should say, once that's gone. But that one leap is so difficult to make, but make the leap. If you know who it is, do the paperwork, do what you got to do. I mean, it's not as quick thing, right? I understand it's not always a quick thing. But they tend to make it quick. If you really focus on it, they'll make it quick for you. I like to say I love when the trash takes itself out. But sometimes you have to do it. And that's what I would say. Make that difficult decision and tear the Band-Aid off, and you'll see an immediate improvement once it's gone.
I think shape up or ship out is what I was thinking in that sentence. Yeah. But they're awesome employees, and I'm not proposing to get rid of everyone by any means, but I 100% agree. If you can't be on the bus, as Sean McVay talks about a lot, and you can't find the right seat on the bus for you, because maybe you need to be on a different bus completely. I agree. Getting rid of people.
I think he told me once, I heard, not me personally, I heard him tell someone in a meeting, I'm going to give you the opportunity to succeed elsewhere. So I always love that.
That's right.
Feel that no, Jamie, what is your tip or your piece of advice?
Mine's definitely core values. Do the work. I wasted so much time telling myself like I didn't have time to, establish the core values. But then once you do, you have to use them on a daily basis. Like they're there. I honestly feel like once core values were set, they're like the rudder that helped right the ship. So you have to do the work. It is so worth it. And then all those other things come, like you establish core values, what, the guidelines are, and then you can hold people accountable to those, and you can terminate those people when they're not aligned with your core values. And you have to step outside of your fear. You can't be afraid to fire people, can't be afraid to really live your core values. You have to get over that. Because I think once you do, it's an amazing, rewarding feeling. And yes, you're still going to have hard decisions you're going to have to make. You're still going to have challenging times. All those things will still happen. But once you have core values established and you really know, okay, what direction are we going? All of us on the same, bus, in the right seats, go in the same direction. Like once those things are in place, it makes those really challenging times a little less challenging, and those hard decisions a little less hard, because you have something to lean into. I think that was the hard part that I had, is when they weren't there, it was like, okay, am I making the right decision? I'm not making the right decision. Well, when there were core values, I was able to say, okay, well, I'm making the decision that best aligns with the core values that we decided on. And also never just let them sit and be like, okay, this is it forever. Amen. Like you have to constantly be looking like, does this still align with us? Because with COVID, it shifted a lot of things for practices. Like, okay, what really is important to us? Okay, maybe those things don't really speak to it to the extent that we want, so we had to make some changes and adjustments. And I think being open to allowing for change and, pivoting when we need to, and all those types of things, flexibility was always one of my core values. for myself personally and just for the hospital team as a whole. And I think that really was something that we could lean into when COVID started, because it was like, yeah, we have to, we have to lean into this particular core value really hard right now. But yes, it is about getting those established, doing the work, because I think it makes all the difference in the world when you have, some real, I'm kind of a role lover. Like I like black. I work in the gray. So I always I love the black and the white, because it just makes it so much easier. And that's what core values, I think, really did for me, is it gave me, kind of a, like I said, it was like a guideline, something I could lean into, especially when things were hard. So that's my advice.
I also think it gives you the opportunity to reward and appreciate and acknowledge the team members who are following those values like hardcore and who are doing a wonderful job, because I do think that that's something that we're not always the best about, is acknowledging the good in our team members. So I do think that the talking about the values and focusing on them at different times really helps you get rid of the people that aren't following it, but also rewarding and appreciating the people who are following
Yeah,
it.
it unifies us. It unifies us when we can all be, sharing in that together, and celebrate when, we've done a really good job.
Yeah. Celebration is important. And then having, Taco Tuesday nights with our team and appreciating, and that's what I love about Susie's hospital. She celebrates with her team, and they come and they get to eat dinner together, and it's just, they have a great time. So I do really love that about your practice. And
We do love our Tuesdays.
yeah, Taco Tuesdays. I know. I think it's great though. So, well, thank you ladies for coming and joining me on our little discussion of toxicity in the workplace. And I love how it's a natural course of what we talk about. So there's nothing planned or staged. We always have our own ideas of stuff. So thank you guys. I hope the audience, if I always forget to promote my YouTube channel, because I'm not the best at this, but please like or subscribe to my channel, and then you can get upcoming or all things veterinary management or veterinary practice related. And I will be having another panel discussion next month, which I'm very excited about. So please like or subscribe to my channel, and then you can get all the updates. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye, ladies.
Thank you.
Bye.
How's the recording?